Ooh, what is that? Nice smallmouth. Big old post spawner. On the tush. Come here. Come here. Oh, big old post spawn on the tush. God, that's a long fish, just no weight to it. Big post spawn. Smallmouth sitting out on a point. Guys, the tush is the ultimate swim bait head. I'm gonna give you 10 reasons why. I think after those 10, you might be thinking to yourself, you need to try a new swim bait head. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today I get to finally talk about tush to you. That's the ultimate swim bait head. This guy right here, I truly believe that this is the best jig head ever designed for swim bait fishing, and I've got 10 reasons why they are better than traditional jig heads. And I think after these 10 reasons, you're gonna think to yourself that you might wanna try these if you enjoy throwing a swim bait. So we're gonna dive right into this. Now, first off, when you look at this, you probably go, well, where's the jig head? Well, just as a reference, this is a 3.3 Keitech Fat Impact swim bait on a 2/0 jig head that weighs 3/16 ounce. But there's no jig head. You don't see anything there. Well, we've designed it so that it's internal within the swim bait. And what this does is give you a lot of advantages over traditional jig heads that have the weight in the front of the hook. Now, there's a lot of things that this does that makes it better. Now, the first thing I just want to talk about right off the bat is the belly roll. Because the weight is inside of the swim bait, what ends up happening is you get a much more realistic swimming action that actually looks more like a line through, but it's weighted. So in this case, your bait gets a lot more belly roll than what you would normally get out of the same swim bait. So if you're throwing something like that Keitech right here, which is traditionally more of a bait that has more tail kick, you get more side to side belly roll out of it, which in my opinion generates more strikes. It also takes a bait like the Keitech, which has gotten so popular that in my opinion the fish are starting to get a little bit accustomed to it. You give that bait that's been around for a while a different look, and it's like the fish haven't seen it before. So the first thing has to do with the belly roll. The second, because your weight again is inside of the swim bait itself, it becomes extremely easy to skip. So you don't have a front heavy swim bait like you'd have with a traditional jig head. You have a swim bait with the weight inside of it, and this thing will skip under docks, under trees, for a lot longer than you could ever get a traditional jig head. So that's one thing I love to do with it. I love flipping it around docks, flipping it under trees. It just is a great way to generate strikes. Another thing that's so good about it, the third reason that I love this thing, is because it creates a much more compact swim bait, meaning you don't have a 1/2 inch to almost an inch of head in front of the swim bait. So if I were to take that same swim bait, a lot of times you put a traditional jig head on it and you have a whole extra head. You can add up to an inch. In this case, this is a 3.3 swim bait. With our hook, it's a 3.3 inch swim bait. And because of that, you get a much more compact design, so you can actually fish the true size of the baits. And in my opinion, it looks much more realistic because of that. The last thing I want is if you're throwing a swim bait that's got an eye that's molded into it and a jig head that's got an eye, you get that double eye look to it. It looks funny. In this case, the only thing you see is the swim bait, and that to me makes it much better. The fourth thing, because of that compact design, actually leads to the bait casting better. You know, the longer your bait gets, the bigger your bait gets, the more your bait wants to flutter, the more it'll roll on the cast. But because the weight is internal, what you'll find is that this bait casts really well. to the point where I'm throwing a little 3/16 ounce 2-aught 3.3 Kitech on heavy bass fishing gear with 15-pound tests. So it is something that really allows you to cast a lot better, which means you're going to cast further. It also means you're going to cast much more accurately. The fifth thing, again, has to do with the internal weight. Because the bait is not front heavy, if you like to tight line or really slow roll your swim baits, what happens with a lot of traditional baits is it wants to ride in the water nose down because the weight is pulling it down. With this jig head design, the bait runs much more horizontal on the water to the point where even if you kill it on the stop, the bait will actually glide versus fall straight down, and that generates a lot of additional strikes for me. The sixth reason here, guys, and none of these are, there's no particular order to any of this, but this is probably my favorite. This design locks your swim baits in place, meaning once you've threaded the swim bait on, just like you would on any normal hook shank if you're threading the bait on, it locks it in place. Now, I don't use super glue, but if you want to use super glue, at that point, your bait's not coming off and you're not changing it until the fish pulls the tail off and you have to change it. But with this design, we've got the stack cone keeper, which really locks it into place already, and therefore you don't have to do much, but it locks your bait into place, which means you go through significantly less tackle. You're not you're just not changing baits. And as we all know, a lot of times these soft Kitechs and similar style swim baits really can tear up easily, especially if you're catching lots and lots of little, like 12-inch size fish. They're worse than the big fish. The big fish eat the whole bait. The little ones are the ones that pull the tail and just create a lot of headaches. Okay, another reason this is better than traditional jig heads. If you like to fish around rock, if you've got a traditional jig head, that traditional jig head with the weight in front will really dive into the rocks, which means you get stuck a lot more in the rocks than you will with our bait, which rides over the rocks. The only way you're going to really get snagged with ours is when your line gets pinched between two rocks, and in that case, you're going to get stuck with whatever it is that you're throwing. But the worst thing you can have when fishing rocks is a single weight, because that's going to pull everything down. In order for our weight to get between rocks, the whole bait has to get buried. And because of that, you get a lot less snags. And I do want to point out, we've got a bunch of different sizes. So we've got, the one I've been holding is a little 2-aught 3/16 ounce. We've got a 4-aught that's a 3/8 ounce. And for those big swim baits, we've got a 7-aught that's a 3/4 ounce. And the cool thing is when you bury these in your bait, the baits don't really change any shape or size. So it really is nice. I also want to go back to the fact that you go through less baits, that means you save a bunch of money. So if you're going through 1 pack less of baits per outing, that's $7-8 every time you go out of your swim bait fishing. So that really can add up, because you know as well as I do, if you're using really soft swim baits like Kitechs and you're on a good Kitech bite, you can go through packs upon packs while out on the water. In our case, I feel very confident to say you're going to go through probably close to 50% less baits. And if you super glue them in place, you'll go through even less than that. Okay, so another thing I want to point out has to do with the design again and why this is better. When you're when you're getting bit by fish, one of the worst things, or one of the things that leads to bad hookups, is a big weight in the front. Meaning when you bust that fish's mouth open to get that big 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce jig head through the fish's mouth, you blow the mouth open. And if you set the hook too hard, in a lot of instances, the whole bait comes flying out behind that big jig head. In our case, there is no big jig head to blow the mouth open. So what happens is when you pull this through the fish's mouth, there's nothing that blows it open. You get the front of the swim bait, and what's behind that? The hook. If you're throwing a more traditional design for your swim baits, you get that big head right here that needs to come through the fish's mouth. And what that does is it can lead to poor hookups. Now, once you've hooked the fish, Another advantage though to this is you don't have a front heavy bait. So that big jig head on traditional swim bait heads actually leads to a lot of lost fish, especially if they come and jump at a long distance from the boat, because they use the leverage of that jig head swinging back and forth. That leads to a lot of lost fish. In our case, we've got the weight spread out and actually coming down the shank closer to the back. And the closer you get to where that fish is hooked, the less leverage they get. So it results in a lot less lost fish and better hookups. Guys, it's pretty ridiculous how much better this hook is, in my opinion. We've been using this now for probably a year, prototyping lots of different designs. We've got this thing totally dialed in my opinion. Johnny Schultz is coming out with a bunch of videos showing a bunch of big fish catches. I've been using it in a lot of my tournaments already. If you watch a bunch of my tournament recaps, you've probably seen me mention it. I just haven't shown it yet, but I've caught a pile of fish on it all year long. The Tush, the ultimate swim bait head by Core Tackle, is a phenomenal one, guys. I think you need to check it out. You can go get them at tacklewarehouse.com, get them at coretackle.com. I will put the links in the video description for you. Guys, go get yourself some. I think you'll be very, very impressed.